Hey everybody, it's Spoonbender here. Going to be doing another Lightroom edit on one of my photos from virtual photography. This is a photo from Control, a wonderfully Lovecraftian Metroidvania. I really like this picture because it just kind of bends the mind a little bit. It was taken inside of an office, but the picture is of the main foyer in Central Research, and it just gives this really interesting contrast between the two locations. And what the purpose of this edit is going to be is to really clear things up and bring out more of the color and the light in this photo while also maintaining the integrity of both scenarios present here, because I don't want to muddy one or the other or lose the fact that it's two pictures in one. The first thing I'm going to do really quickly is I want to bring some attention to the concrete on the background because it's so nondescript, but there's so much that can be done with this just because the texture alone, you can tell from the lighting alone that the texture is just real. Like it's a well done texture. So what I'm going to do is a little trick where in Lightroom we can have it select a subject. Sometimes it doesn't work, but thankfully for this, it does recognize that this photograph is our subject. Now, a neat little trick is after we select this photograph as the subject, we can invert that and select everything that isn't the photograph, which is exactly what we want. We want the focus on the concrete. So what I'm going to do now that we have the concrete selected, so I'm going to drop the exposure a little bit, and I'm going to go to our texture here because it's already good texture, but I want to just emphasize that. And you can see right away how much more vibrance and life it's going to bring into that texture. So we're going to bump up the texture and the clarity, just a hint, because clarity can easily get out of hand, and then you have another issue entirely. I'm also going to go up here to the contrast and the blacks. So the blacks I'm going to lower because the lower you lower this bar on the blacks, the more prominent they become, the higher you get it, the less prominent they become. We really want to bring some emphasis to all the pock marks and the line work in that concrete. So we're going to lower that just a little bit. But right away, you can see how much more texture is in that concrete. So there's without, and there it is with. And that concrete is just, it's a part of the picture now as opposed to just a backdrop of it. So now we're going to go back in. We really don't want to keep editing the background. Normally, if we just go to overall settings like this and start messing with exposure, it's going to edit the background on top of the edits we've already done. And you don't want to do that because then it just becomes too sharp or too clear or too exposed. So what we're going to do is again, select our subject here, which is this picture, and that's all we need to be selected. So we're going to do all that editing from inside just this. So right off the bat, I'm going to bump up the exposure just a hair because there's a lot of light in that photo. But when it's not, the background original picture here, the office that I'm standing in when I took this photo, is getting lost. So I'm going to bump up the exposure just a touch without that foyer becoming extremely bright. I'm going to bump up contrast because it's my best friend in the world. And I always bump up my contrast. Shadows and blacks just a touch because we don't want to lose any of the definition. But right away, you can see if we hide it and then unhide, watch how much more clarity comes in just like that. It's just the minute details that add together. We're going to go down here and go to our clarity, up the clarity just a bit because we want everything in this picture to just really pop, all the individual pieces here. And when you do clarity, you're increasing the defining edges around every object in the photo. We don't really need to do sharpness because clarity will take care of that, and sharpness can easily create graininess, and we don't want any more of that than we already have. So that's about all we can do in this individual mask. So we're done here. We're going to go back to our overall settings, And now we're going to mess with the color. So the colors that we're seeing in this picture, we've got some greens, we've got some reds and oranges, and that's about it. There isn't a whole lot of color outside from those really strong tones. But one thing you can do is you can bump up your blue, because there is always a lot more blue than you expect in your photos. And doing that just adds this interesting layer of richness to the photo. Watch when I get rid of it, how much it loses. But it doesn't gain a whole lot in this instance when you bump up the blue. But you can see when it's gone. Blue is there, blue is gone. So I'm not going to go to the max, but I will add it up there just a little bit to add some depth. We want to bump up our reds a little, we want to bump up our oranges a little, and we want to bump up the greens, just because you can see those binders are really vibrant in this picture. And then on top of that, we're getting pretty close to this photo being where I want it to be. If we want to be extremely picky, I can go in here and add a new brush. I'm going to zoom in here. My brush is massive for some reason. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to bring some clarity to these grooves in the wall, because I love how these look in that concrete. We already touched up the concrete a little bit, but I'm just going to go back through. That's a bad line. I'm going to go back through and just bring out a little bit more definition in these grooves. Don't need to do a whole lot, because they're already fine as they are, but just for sake of being super high maintenance, let's go ahead and add something to them. You'll see here in a minute what that'll do. This is the big one. So these cracks, these grooves that just add so much character to the background, we want to bring those just a hair more involved in the picture. I really wish I had a stencil. It's tricky to do this on a mouse. There we go. So we're just filling in some of these cracks like digital mortar. Almost done. We don't want to overdo the size here. Like, if you make this too big, oh, it's bleeding outside the cracks. We don't want that. We just want the cracks. Because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower the exposure of all these cracks. And it's just going to darken up the concrete just a little bit. Watch when I get rid of it, how much more character it gets. There we go. Darken it, and that just adds so much more texture to those cracks. But now this picture is pretty much where I want it to be. Here's the before, and there's the after. Just adds so much life to our concrete background and some color and clarity to the main picture without losing the integrity of both locations. I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough, and thanks for watching.